good morning to everyone. This is Muhammad Rayatul Islam, Senior Officer, Outreach Extension and Continuing Education Wing of the Office of the Pro-Vice Chancellor, IUB. I'll be your anchor for today's panel discussions at the IUB Auditorium. So first and foremost, let me thank everyone who has taken their precious time out of their busy schedules to be among us today, whether in person or online, and welcome you all to the third day of the international conference titled 10th Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum 2022. Ecology is Economy, jointly hosted by the Balipara Foundation of Assam in India and the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies, CBOBS, at the Independent University, Bangladesh. I'd also like to thank and welcome our honorable trustee members of the BOT-IUB, our beloved students, our faculty and staff members, the participants, and the discussants who will present their papers, and friends from the media and everyone present among us today. So the first theme of today's panel discussion is basically mobility technology to securitize global carbon. Let me give you a brief introduction and then we'll proceed with the panel discussion. So reducing vehicle emissions is critical to mitigating climate change given the increasing transportation demands of rising urban populations. It also plays an important role in achieving international climate action goals, such as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. In recent years, many vehicles and parts manufacturers have set targets to reduce vehicle emissions substantially. The majority of regulatory and industrial efforts for vehicle decarbonization have been geared towards reducing the tailpipe emissions, as 65 to 80% of the vehicle emissions come from the tailpipe and emissions-intensive fuel production processes. Now, to this end, vehicle electrification and increasingly stringent fuel efficiency standards for the internal combustion engine cars have been effective. Now, industry players are looking beyond the engine. There is increasing interest in reducing the material footprint in the vehicle supply chain, increasing resource efficiency in manufacturing, and rethinking the battery and vehicle end-of-life processes. So with those few words, before we head to our panel discussion moderated by Mr. Alvin Didar Singh, the former Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, may we kindly request our keynote speaker of this session, Mr. Vivek Srivastava, the head of the Tata Passenger Electric Mobility Limited India, to come up on stage and give his presentation. Sir.
I manage this slide. Good morning. Not a very big crowd, but thanks to who has come here. It's a privilege and honor to be presenting here. Thank you to the delegates and the organizers. And it's indeed it's a topic that's been very close to my heart, but also it's a pleasure to be representing a company which is really driving the e-mobility revolution in India. And I'm here to share a few learnings and thoughts from the experience we've had over the last 3 years. So starting with the theme, I think ecology is economy is a very strong theme. And what really caught our eye was the simplicity behind what we called as expanding the Sundarban and expanding the wildlife around increasing the valuation of our natural assets. It's a very simple theme, but I think it delivers a long-term sustainable income, long-term sustainable economy, as well as sustainable communities for the long term. And this simplicity is what really is going to make a big difference. We're not looking at big projects and long-term plans, but something as simple as increasing the valuation of our natural assets is very powerful. Obviously, this is going to deliver both immediate benefits in terms of reducing emissions, increasing the sustainable economy and income for the communities, but long-term benefits in terms of mental and physical well-being, which is something that we don't usually count among societal goodness that we talk about. Obviously, the larger picture is all this is going to drive towards net zero. So again, I congratulate this very, very simple but bold theme of the forum here. All of us know the troubles caused by increasing emissions across the world. Short term in terms of pollution, long term in terms of physical, mental health, and of course, global warming. And as the auto industry, we are responsible for 18% of global emissions across the world, which is a substantial amount. And I think on behalf of all auto majors, I can say that we have to take a very pioneering approach in terms of overcoming and pushing towards zero emission vehicles in the future. Of course, this is a marathon, and it's not a switch that is just can be thrown to change everything to zero emission. It is a step-by-step approach that we need to take, starting from putting in place a roadmap to move towards zero emission, setting in place the infrastructure on the ground, so that this technology becomes accessible to the mass consumer. Globally, auto industry has taken a lead in many countries, aided by government norms. We see in countries like UK and a large part of Europe, in fact, have taken very, very aggressive targets to move towards net zero. In fact, the UK is committed movement to completely electric mobility by 2030, and Europe by 2035, which I believe is a pretty ambitious target. India also is moving firmly towards electric vehicle penetration. By 2030, the government has taken a target of 30% electric vehicle penetration. But the larger consensus, as you can see, is that globally, electric vehicles seem to be the solution to reducing vehicular emissions. And obviously, there are a lot of questions in terms of how clean is the energy, is it going to be sustainable, what's the emission footprint at the 0 kilometer when the vehicle actually is in the showroom. These are questions with a very simple answer, in fact. The answer is that we have to take steps to move towards zero emission. Perhaps an electric vehicle is not the solution today, but it definitely is going to be a solution 10 years down the line when the entire ecosystem is green, when the power generation is greenified through sustainable power generation, and then we'll have the reality of the entire auto industry actually embracing zero emission. So skeptics continue to question us, but we have to take firm steps today, run the marathon so that 10, 15 years down the line, we have the solution in place. Obviously, all this endeavor between the auto manufacturers and governments is towards the larger picture of arresting climate change, reducing emissions, and Indian government as well in COP26 last year has taken a 5-point approach. It's called as Panchamrit, which puts in place several regulatory as well as enabling mechanisms to move towards the ambition I spoke about in terms of net zero, but also putting the auto industry on track, giving the confidence to manufacturers to invest, and more importantly, giving confidence to consumers to actually start moving towards electric vehicles. Obviously, like I said earlier, the movement towards electric vehicle is a marathon, as we call it. There are many, many hindrances, starting with the cost of the vehicle, starting with questions in terms of how clean is the energy used to power the cars, the lack of awareness among customers, range anxiety, as we call it, which is the most common refrain for electric vehicle purchase. But if you look at the other side, everything is actually aligning towards adoption of long-term electric vehicles. Obviously, the bigger picture is the zero tailpipe emission of electric vehicles, but globally, as energy consumption and energy development becomes greener, the entire ecosystem around electric vehicles will develop. Natural resources availability will be explored by different countries within and outside their countries. Technologies will develop. Universities such as this will start developing curriculum to support electric vehicle infrastructure, electric vehicle manufacturing, and then we'll really see the positive side of the whole thing. And we, as EV Manufacturing Consortium, we believe that all this coming together will ultimately lead to the penny drop where the customer starts believing in electric vehicle at a mass level. Today, across the world, EV penetration is still in the low single digits in terms of percentages. And for it to convert into 30, 40, 50%, the consumer is the key. And the consumer will look at it in very simple lenses in terms of cost of acquisition, cost of driving, and the long term sustainability of owning a EV at a personal level. And that's where government policies and manufacturers' commitment will be evaluated by every single customer. And because the customer is going to put his money on the table, and at a very frank and basic level, the customer really doesn't care too much about zero emissions and all that. They want the easiest way to travel from point A to point B, and it is up to governments and manufacturers to give them a solution which happens to be eco-friendly. So all these different parameters have to come together to make economic sense for the customer, as well as economic and ecological sense for the countries. So we've seen in India the kickstart or kickoff of this entire move towards zero tailpipe emissions for any country has to be dictated by the government. Uh, a sustainable EV policy or a zero emission policy has to be put in place. Regulatory frameworks with a clear roadmap, probably subsidizing electricity, subsidizing EV manufacturing or EV import, but also a clear direction in terms of regulation of emissions of internal combustion engine is the first point. Unless there's a clear direction from the government, there will not be enough of commitment from manufacturers to invest. And obviously, like I said earlier, customers will not buy into this whole story unless the government really shows a clear direction. Once the government shows direction, as we saw it in India and many other countries, the ecosystem starts falling in place. You have big manufacturers, but you also have a lot of startups funded by many, equity funds from across the world who are focused on investing in climate change, arresting climate change. The ecology starts, developing in terms of putting in place the infrastructure. You have a lot of private players who will come into the charging infrastructure game. Import of precious metals to make batteries will begin. Putting in place local manufacturing plants will be the second step in terms of moving towards a sustainable zero tailpipe emission dream. And obviously, next comes the awareness from customers. Like I said again earlier, customers have to be aware that EVs are the future. EVs are a sustainable mode of transportation, and that's when the money starts coming out from the customer's pocket in this eco-friendly technology. What are the challenges? Some of the challenges faced by manufacturers is obviously the acquisition cost of EVs. Worldwide, we see anything between 50 to 60% more expense in terms of manufacturing an EV. And that can only come down in two ways: greater localization and government support in terms of promoting local manufacturing and providing subsidies to manufacturers so that the EV is accessible to the normal customer. Natural resources continue to be a challenge in terms of both localization of the car as well as the battery. A large component of battery manufacturing is imported from a few countries. That forms a very big cost. And again, I see government support here in terms of enabling manufacturers to import and put in place the batteries of the EVs locally at a subsidized cost. Like I mentioned earlier, skill development is very, very important. In every country where EVs have become mainstream, we've seen academia embracing the technology, um, both the chemistry part of it and the mechanical engineering part of it, as well as the overall uh, subject around zero tailpipe emissions, can form very, very strong academic pursuits. We need universities to really embrace this part of the curriculum, so that in future we have engineers, we have chemical engineers coming out within the country who are able to contribute to the EV ecosystem. Quick look at what Tata Motors has done. We started with a product. Obviously, the government had put in place a clear roadmap towards EV penetration and towards reducing carbon emissions in the country. Like I said, as part of COP26, Panchamrit scheme was launched. We decided that we'll have to convert one of our largest selling product, most accepted product, which was being sold as ICE, into an EV product. Fortunately, we had the engineering skills and the knowledge to do it. Again, like I said, that's where the universities and the curriculum play a big role. We expanded an exclusive EV brand for customers to actually start believing in it. Um, Partnership model. This is very important. No manufacturer can do it alone. You have to put in place an entire EV ecosystem in terms of charging infrastructure, in terms of service, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of import. So it Fortunately for Tata Motors, we have a group of companies within the country, and probably for the first time ever, all the group companies started working towards a single goal, which is something which doesn't happen very easily, even though we are part of the same group. And that became very critical to achieve what we achieved with the speed what we did. To give you an inkling, the first EV conversion product was delivered in just 3 months. And that's because of the push from the government, and also the group companies and the government working together to make the product a reality. So a partnership model, I'll elaborate that subsequently as well, will be very important for any country to rapidly move towards electric vehicles. And again, at the cost of repeating myself, government initiatives continue in India. While the central government has made the roadmap for the future, we have respective state governments supporting the central government in terms of giving subsidies, in terms of giving tax waivers for their public, so that the car becomes more accessible to the general public. So a joint inclusive approach is what is very important. It's what worked in India, and I believe it is what will work in Bangladesh as well. It has to be started out by the government embracing emission norms, embracing a policy to move Bangladesh towards a much lower carbon emission situation. Obviously, it will start with regulating the ICE engine portfolio in the country, um, promoting EV local manufacturing by giving subsidies for manufacturers who are willing to invest and produce locally, and EVs becoming on par with ICE in terms of affordability to customer is what is going to be the next step. And of course, long term, working with industry, academia, and other organizations to promote customer knowledge about pollution, about emission, about the need to move into zero tailpipe emissions is going to be very important. Once the government does that, we will see the private economy kicking in. You will see a lot of entrepreneurs, manufacturers coming in and embracing the government vision, and then obviously the public comes in to consume the product. So the reality is, while the government would need to kick off this entire project, um, co-working, cooperative working, and working with speed is what would be the need of the hour. Thank you. That's it from me, and I'm open to some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vivek Srivastava, for your brilliant insights and a beautiful presentation for all of us. I just want to inform you guys that besides having the physical presence here at the auditorium for the first panel discussions, we are also having over 200 people online who are watching this right now. So now I would like to invite Mr. Alvin Didar Singh, former Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the moderator of this session, to come up on stage and take his seat. Thank you, sir. And also, I'd like to invite Mr. Mayank Baldi, the head passenger and electric vehicles international business, Tata Motors Passengers Vehicles, to come up on stage and take your seat, sir. Thank you very much. Okay, sir, please. And sir, will you moderate this session? Right? Okay, so now I would like our honorable moderator to moderate this first panel discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Glad to see that the hall is slowly filling up, but anyways, it's a good sign. But basically, this very important session, which is a continuation of the Eastern Himalayan context that we are looking at, where over the last 2 days, we very clearly made it very possible for everybody to understand that environment is a serious issue. And now we are switching to the real theme of the conference, which is ecology is economy. So what is the meaning of ecology is economy? It means basically that the issues of ecology must enter into the economy and provide solutions for people. And this is one of the solutions. EV is one of the solutions of zero emission or lower emission, so that we ensure that ecology is actually something which becomes part of our daily lives. And that is something which I'm really compliment Tata Motors and everybody else around here for the steps that they have taken. Now, different countries around the world have taken different steps. And we know that government, you heard a lot from Vivek about government's role. Yes, certainly government has a role, because the structures of governance are such which got set up 70 years ago as after the Second World War. And those structures of governance continue even to this day. 70 years plus, and we have these 200 plus countries around the world, independent units, but each of them has a role for government. And that is why the structures of governance and governance or government's importance in the role of ecology becomes that much more clear for all of us to imagine and see. Now we know that EV is the future. Electric vehicles, or EV as we refer to it in short form, is the future, whether we like it or not. Just like ecology is the future, whether we like it or not. We have to learn, humans have to learn, that the only way to manage the environment is to reduce our destruction of it. And EV is one way that the urban transportation, you heard just now from Vivek, 80% of emission around the world comes from vehicles. Now that must come down to zero. So we have steps being taken by different countries. You heard from him that Europe is far advanced. America, UK, whatever are far advanced, but we in Asia also need to catch up. And it is in this context that India has announced a very specific policy for EVs. And so is Bangladesh. Bangladesh is moving in the same direction. And we see that already the guidelines for the infrastructure are already in place. And we need more of that stuff. And I'm going to, in fact, ask Vivek that very question. What is it really that he expects the government to do in Bangladesh, which has not happened till now? What is it that you think? In India, we had a very simple thing. The minister announced that EVs, or the whole government announced that EVs have to come, and we want to, as he mentioned, 30% by 2030. But to do it, a very simple step was taken by government. And what is that simple step? All government purchase of vehicles will only be electric. A very simple solution that government itself, even though it's not impacting that much of the whole economy, because government vehicles are a very small percentage of the total amount which are purchased around the country, but it's a step which shows the commitment of government. Now, steps like this need to get taken from around the world by other countries to ensure that we follow and go in the same direction as everybody else. And in that context, I want to ask a few questions from Vivek and his other colleagues. And my question number one is, we see that EVs are the future, and you did point out in your presentation how electric vehicles contribute towards zero emission. But let me ask you the more specific question. What do you expect in Bangladesh? What do you expect South Asian countries to do to improve the situation or improve the structure under which EVs can actually come about out here?
Yeah, thank you. I would say from the government, the first step is to put in place emission norms.
Emission norms.
Emission norms which bring the profile of emissions from vehicular park in Bangladesh up to a standard. I mean, in Europe, we have something called the Euro 6 now. In most of the countries around the world, we have something called Euro 5 or the locally adapted version of Euro 5. That is the first step.
As we do in India also, we have Bharat.
India, we have something called BS5, Bharat Stage 5. So that kind of regulates the emission norms for internal combustion engines. But of course, that is part of a long-term move towards zero emission of vehicular park. And the next step, obviously, is to start getting in EV into the product mix being sold in the country. Like I said, EV is more expensive to produce because the battery cost is higher, and applying the same level of taxation to EV versus ICE vehicle will not be sustainable. EVs are going to reduce a lot of costs for government in the long term, including importing fuel. And usually power generation costs are lower than fuel imports. Usually, depends on country to country. So giving subsidies in terms of tax reduction for local manufacturing of EV is step number 2. And step number 3 will be the greenification of power generation. We all know that traditional, polluting sources of power is not sustainable. Moving to greener sources of energy is critical for the country as a whole, and definitely in terms of how the
So you're mentioning
EVs are
power production for the whole country, for the whole economy, and also for EVs.
Absolutely, yeah. Power generation is again a very big source of pollution if the sources are non-sustainable. That is something the government need to focus on.
Wonderful. Thank you for that very, very lucid answers. Mayank, let me ask you a more specific question. In terms of the infrastructure that is going to be required for EV, we in FICCI, and then I was with the Delhi Policy Group, we did a study on this whole business of readiness, so to speak, of different countries and different parts, different states in India. Where were they? And we did some cities, and we found that Delhi was at the highest, followed by Bangalore, which is number 2, and then came other cities, and of course we had the lowest was in Panaji in Goa. Now, how do you find that infrastructure issue? How is it going to impact Bangladesh?
So I'll give some examples outside India as well. And very recently, we have seen success stories in Nepal, in Bhutan, and globally it is anyways happening. But it will be more contextual and relevant if we talk about South Asian nations. So the government in Nepal did a very interesting turn. In Nepal, along with the incentives, the import duty benefits, the long-term EV policy, what Vivek touched upon, the infrastructure part, they also said, let the OEMs participate. So there was a public-private partnership, which the model which was followed. And now the government is seeing that what Tatas have done or what other companies have done, they are putting up their own charging facilities. So
their
own charging facilities where people can go charge, fast charge, slow charge, or it's like your mobile phone. So the convenience of charging your mobile phone, if it does not come in your EV car, people will still get into that anxiety mode. So it has become so easy there in Nepal that if you go to Kathmandu, where 70% of the EV penetration is already achieved, people see it almost like a regular ICE car, and they have lower TCO, which means the total cost of ownership is lower, and it is clearly the preference and the choice. With same amount of features, perhaps even better, with convenience of service, charging network, all of it, it is being proven that EVs is a good long-term sustainable play. The other thing which we did as an OEM there is that before you launch the vehicle, you let the service ecosystem flourish. So the spare part, the technology knowledge, the skilling development is very different here. Because if the people don't know how to work with batteries and software and electronics and all these gadgets, it will fail eventually. So very dedicatedly, 3 months of rigorous training part was done before the vehicle was launched. It's almost like a baby. Before you bring the baby to the family, how much care you would take. It's exactly the same way that you do for EV, especially when the countries are not prepared to take that.
That's a very good example. Very good example. Thank you very much for your clarification. I think it's very important to get from all of you wonderful experts sitting here and some students, from you some questions to the very learned people we have on the channel here. So would anybody like to get up and ask a question or suggest anything that needs further clarification? No, not yet. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please. Okay, can we get a microphone here, please? One here. Here, this gentleman in the center.
Hi, thanks for your thanks for your comments and your talks. I'm just curious about what's the status of electric motorbikes, especially small personal transport. It seems like that could be a really game-changing thing in places like Dhaka or Jakarta or Manila.
It's not my area of core competency since I come from vehicles with two more tires, but you're right. In terms of mass transportation, electrification of the two-wheeler fleet is very important. I'll give you an example from India, where electric vehicle penetration in two wheels has reached the hinterland much faster than cars, and we see a larger acceptance of electric motorcycles even in very small towns and villages in the country. They don't have the worry about range because they don't drive so much. They have a big benefit of lower cost of operation. So in terms of overall emission norms, I think in countries such as Bangladesh and India, the two-wheeler park is going to make a big difference in terms of reducing emissions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, the study that we did in India showed that the two-wheeler market will be the one to first take off for the simple reason that you can charge it at home. You can charge it at home. You don't have to depend on the infrastructure for the whole country. You can charge it at home, run it for the day and come back home because it has a very limited amount of usage, but that usage can come out of the home charging. But more important is the overall buses. And in that, I must compliment Bangladesh. They have taken the step of introducing e-buses first. That's a wonderful step. That's really the way forward. If you introduce e-buses, then you're moving to mass transit or mass transportation, and that really helps in the whole system. The gentleman there had a question. Yes, sir.
So my question is kind of a little bit comment than a question. I think when you talk about the electricity, right, EV, I think we should also talk about the source of electric generation. So as you know that almost 70% power, electric power in India is generated by coal. I think in that sense, it's not absolutely clean. Like if you need more electricity, that means the more areas under forest or the areas where coal are there will be extracted, right? So I think when we talk about the EVs, I think that in the same breath, we should also talk about the sources from where we are getting electricity. And also similar is the case with the batteries, right? So batteries, all this lithium and the cobalt and all those things. So those are not found at you can't do the open mining and all. So these are at the surface of the forest in Congo and Australia. So while doing that also, there are a lot of environmental restrictions happening. So I think we should be a little bit careful also. I think from the source of electricity, and if there are more recycling of the batteries that has been done, I think then obviously this is far more better than petrol running car or vehicles. So
Yeah,
is
you're
that-
absolutely
yes.
correct. You're absolutely right. And Vivek already addressed that in his presentation. You saw he was talking about power source. He was not just talking about e-vehicles. He says for the whole country, you need to improve and have green production of power. Now that is a very key issue. It's an issue which doesn't impact just EVs. It impacts all of society or the whole economy. You're absolutely right. And material for manufacturing batteries is the second point that you've made. It's again very, very important. It's limited at the moment. Only a few countries supply the material. But ultimately, there is a lot of research happening in that area of batteries. And possibly we will move to another. Vivek, any idea
Yeah.
on batteries? What
So
is
2
happening?
points. One is obviously what you said about power generation is right, but it can't be a chicken and egg story. The auto industry cannot wait for greenification of power generation to get the ecosystem for EVs ready. These are parallel lines that need to keep going, and one fine day, all vehicles will be EV and all power generation will be sustainable. But it's in the future. That's why I said we start the marathon now, but probably our next generation will get the benefits. In terms of batteries, yes, battery recycling is an issue, but the reality is these batteries have a very long life. Once they are found not perfectly suitable for use in cars, they have something called a second life and a third life. They can be used for other purposes. They can be used to power homes. They can be used to power other small electrical appliances in remote areas. So the one of the fundamental tenets of sustainability is extending the lifetime of any product, not just EVs. It's about including your phones or the water bottles or anything. The longer you use anything, the better it is for ecology.
Absolutely right. In fact, one of the solutions for the whole battery matter, some of these companies, and I'm very glad to hear that the OEMs have been given the responsibility of doing it. Some of the companies, like we know in America, what they're doing is they don't recharge the battery, they change the battery. You swap the battery every time you go to a charging station. You swap your battery for a battery available there, a fully charged battery. And that's one way of going ahead on this whole matter. Anybody else for any questions, please? Otherwise, I'll ask Karim Saab to elucidate about the Bangladesh situation. Sir. Can we have a microphone here, please? Karim Saab, right in the front row.
Thank you, Didas. Well, we have already, the government has announced the broad policy guidelines that we have to shift to
Yeah.
the motor industry, which we have several challenges. The greenification of our power source
Is a big issue.
Is slow moving, and particularly the recent crisis, the oil and the supply chain crisis may, if it's not resolved quickly, force some of us to go back to the dirty fuel just to keep pace, keep the industries running. So it's a challenge for developing countries which are hostage to supply chains and value chains disruption. Number two, if we have electric batteries for small vehicles, you see many rickshaws which have batteries which are being powered, although they are banned because they create a traffic hazard when they go on the main highways. But there's a proliferation taking place which is unchecked. So at one stage, I think the 2 or 3 wheelers conversion is already happening.
In an informal manner.
Yes, in an informal manner. Informal will at some point of time become formal. or the technology will,
As it always does.
People
Yes.
will emulate that and transfer it. But I think I see more and more green vehicles now in the street than I did 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, good.
So the people's style and consciousness is changing. I think that is the first. The first is people have to recognize that we have to shift. Then the demand will come bottom up and translate up to the upper levels. But about in-depth modalities, it is still somewhat vague. And one big problem that I see, and this the government has to tackle it by the horn sooner rather than later, is if you drive along some of the streets of Dhaka, you'll see a proliferation of cars, of shops selling what do you call the remodeled cars,
Refurbished.
reconditioned cars. Okay, that's a huge market, and they're still coming in, and they're lying at the ports uncollected. Something has to be done in terms of regulatory measures to put a stop to that. Either make it so expensive that people will say, no, I don't want this. I want something else. That's a very powerful lobby again. It translates into the political system. So change will happen, I'm confident. It will happen more slowly than I would like it to happen. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely right. Anybody else for any comment? Yes, the lady there. The lady in the center of the, yeah. There. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And I think it's very important for all of us to know what's happening with electric vehicles. And but one of the things when you talked about the partnerships, I think it's a very important thought process also to think of electric vehicles not in isolation, but also it has to be integrated with the town planning. The thing is, we are talking about reduction also. By increasing the number of electric vehicles, also maybe has to link up with the increase in the public transport rather than the individual electric vehicles. Since uh, since we all have to collaborate, so I think the role of Tata's or the bigger companies is also to engage with the idea of how do you increase electric and ecologically friendly public transport so that people don't have to use cars and vehicles. I think that is something where we have to look into the future. So, which also addresses a lot of other things. So, partnerships cannot be within just the electric vehicle segment, but it has to go into the architecture of the town. And we have so many small towns left. So, before the small towns get into more electric vehicles, I think the small town should get more public transport. So, I think it's a very important discussion to have, and you guys are in a position to do that. So, I think it'll be great if that thought process also gets in.
Sure, I think public transport, efficient public transport is absolutely key in terms of reducing per capita emission. European countries have shown that, and electrification of public transport is more important. We make electric buses as well in India, and glad to partner with the government on that. Last mile connectivity will remain a personal choice, and that's where probably we come in a bigger way, but completely agree with what you said.
No, you're absolutely right. Both these have to go simultaneously. The urban transport on the one side and individual vehicles on the other. They have to work in tandem. And Bangladesh is doing it. You have here the policy of Dhaka being the first city in which these electric vehicles will be supplied. So they're moving in that direction. In Delhi and in India, as they're just mentioning, Tata is already in the sector, and a very large number of vehicles in Delhi, for example, are actually buses which are friendly and electric buses which are now virtually manning the entire fleet. So it's something which has to work in tandem. You're absolutely right. Public transport must get. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. I think this was very educative. I think Rita's point on the roadmap and framework of transportation versus reduction of emissions, I think is a good one. I don't see anybody actually leading it. I'm saying Rita runs a very successful organization for ecological neutrality in Tezpur and Assam. She makes movies, she does all this kind of stuff, which is really fantastic. But actually to strengthen their hands, if you don't have that map of ecological footprint reduction by transportation, because that is, I think, such an important thing, that just by talking about electric vehicles is good. It's promotion of the organization, promoting of a good cause, promoting of profit, people, planet, everything. But I don't see that kind of overall drive in terms of this is our state's emission policy. This is our state's carbon policy. This is our state's policy near a park. You can't drive a car which has, this emission. I don't think there are the rules and strictures, like you said, our rules were made 70 years ago. So coming straight to Bangladesh then, if at the end of this conference we would consider from our foundation successful, if you give us a list of the wants that you want, but equally give us a presentation on what should be the actually policy for electrification of mobility on an overall basis rather than say it's only for cars. I think unless you do that, finally you will come up with the same kind of roadblock. They'll say cars are not good, motorcycles are better, cycles are better. All may be right. So I'm saying there'll be no end to this. If you give us that, and that's what Ambassador Karim was also in government in many ways, and also the other gentleman there, a professor who's actually drives policy. He's part of the, what do you call, entire strategy for negotiations of climate change for Bangladesh. So I think it's very important if you give us a list, actually a formal list, and tell us what really is to be driven and which are the departments. We do apologize that the Minister of Mobility and the largest dealer of cars, if not the Tata cars, both of them actually could not come for, I think, various reasons. Must be for mobility in Dhaka. But nevertheless.
No, it's a very,
I
very
think
good
we need
idea.
to-
And
we need to
I'm
action
sure,
it.
I'm sure Vivek will do it. He will do it. He will give you this list, which you can give us a recommendation from the Himalayan conference that you're having right now. Very good idea. Very good idea. Convert it into actual reality of what's required. So Vivek, you have the time to give this list in the next 7 days.
Yeah, so more than a list, I would say it's co-working with the government, and that's the way we worked in India as well, where not as Tata Motors but as a representative of the auto industry, work with the government. It's not just asking the government for money, but it's also giving a government a win-win kind of a proposition where they give subsidies now, but in the long term, the government also gains. As a country, all of us are facing cafe norms, which will come into place across the world, which will mean the government will have to pay out money for emissions in the future. So it's more about, like I said, co-working, creating a win-win situation with the government, manufacturers, and most importantly, the customers. So glad to be working with the government of Bangladesh for that.
Excellent. We hope that you'll give something out, and it'll go out as from this Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum. It doesn't have to have the Tata name on it. It'll be part of today's session and the work that we're doing here. So that's how we'll address this whole issue. Thank you very much for all your patience and excellent presentation. Yes, sir. Last question. We are running out of time now. Last question. Here, the gentleman here. Second row.
Thank you. In one side, the electric vehicle will reduce the carbon dioxide emission, but the other side, more and more batteries will be imposed to the country. My question is, do you have any plan or proper mechanism to recycle those batteries properly after the end of the life?
So end of life is something we'll definitely have to work on, not only on the batteries, but also on the cars themselves. I just answered a similar question before this. First step before working on battery disposition is about extending the life of the battery. In auto batteries, you have something called second and third life, where it can be used to power many other appliances or even homes, small homes. And we see the average life of a battery to extend well beyond 15 to 20 years. And after that comes the problem of safe disposition of the batteries. That's the roadmap we'll put in place.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time, but we have one gentleman asking the last question, the very last question. Sorry.
Thank you. I know we are running out of time. Just basically, electric vehicle, we are always focusing on the mega cities. We are thinking about the Dhaka. We are thinking about the car and buses. But let's focus on the district level, small cities. I have worked in several district level town. So where there is no that much road even to operate the buses for as public transportation. So either you have to operate the car, and public transportation earlier it was three-wheelers with fuel. So later on, you know, the tuk-tuk. So tuk-tuk already introduced in different district level cities. But problem is that it's basically earlier it's imported from somehow China, and people basically copying locally, and thousands of vehicle now in the road without any permission, but there is no regulation also, because all the focus on car and buses, no one is basically taking that responsibilities to develop those tuk-tuk come up in, they are just using the domestic power line for charging, and it's hampering on the main power supply.
Yeah.
So I am just expecting, apart from the car and other mass vehicle, and these tuk-tuk also using for them as mass vehicles, like 5 or 6 people can travel at a time. So if there is any scope to develop this type of small vehicles, which generally used for the mass transportation, it will be helpful for the small cities.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely, as we mentioned here, and Vivek has already clarified, the entire ecosystem together has to move. And EV is the future, whether we like it or not. So as Ambassador Karim, you heard him talk about the informal economy. Informal economy is already working on the small vehicles and the small conversion of two-wheelers. It will happen. It's happened in India. It will happen here also. And this whole Himalayan region will benefit because of it, because ultimately the idea is that we have to reduce the emissions and reduce the pollution that all of us face. Thank you very much for the session. Thank you to the panelists, and thanks everybody here for attending, and thank you.